what should people be looking at as like the first thing? They're on the carnivore diet. They want some more improvement in their symptoms. What do they look at first?
So first you need to look at how long you've been on the carnivore diet, because I think being on the carnivore diet by itself actually is not a huge amount of information. Yes, you're on this way of eating, which I think we would both agree is the best way of eating, but you also have to look at the context of that. So when you started the carnivore diet, what was your situation then? I.e., what's your medical history? What medical conditions did you have at the time? Mental health issues, etc., etc. We look at all these things, and then we look at the carnivore diet. Yes, that's great, but do we need to add certain things in there to help you individually based on your individual medical history as well? So that's the first place to look. Now, if someone is coming in from a place where they do have medical conditions, the transition into carnivore has to be specific to that. And if they've already transitioned, gut bacteria is fine, they can take, steak all day, as I'm sure we both could. Great. Then we have to look at what is the level of symptom or symptoms that they have. And everything is then based specifically to that, as I'm sure you can probably imagine. So it would be based on the clinical presentation, and then we go from there. And not just the clinical presentation, actually, their lifestyle. So what are they doing in terms of, for example, and there's a lot to it, but I'll give you a couple examples. Are they getting sunshine on their skin? Are they exercising in a way that's appropriate for them as an individual, et cetera, et cetera? And then we want all of that to build a nice picture. And then we go forward based on that picture, looking at this supplement or that supplement if we need it for a particular time period.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. I've been looking at different pieces of data myself. And of course, when we're looking at autism, it's a newer disorder, a newer disease, if it were, as in people being diagnosed with it more. So when I was a child, when you're a child, it wasn't too much of a thing. I mean, you might get 1 or 2 children in the year group, maybe a few more, but now it's, a couple of children in every classroom. I know the research I was sort of putting apart was efficacious doses of different amino acid supplements or vitamins or even minerals to give a certain effect. Now, a lot of these are based on milligrams per kilogram of body weight, for example. Do you think you can extrapolate from those sort of examples of studies to say, okay, if a person supplemented with, say, a milligram of taurine per kilogram of body weight 3 times per day, could that then translate to a 100-kilo male like myself, sort of thing?
It's an interesting question. Personally, I feel the answer is no. However, I will be honest and say I think there are people that would disagree with me, and it's perfectly okay to have that discussion. I'll tell you why I think no. When we take in either a single amino acid or a complete protein, such as steak or chicken or something like that, the process they go through is the same. The process they go through is going into our digestive tract and eventually ending up as single amino acids, even if they start that way. And then what happens is the body decides what to do with those. So let's say, for instance, we know that a particular amino acid, let's take cysteine as an example. N-acetylcysteine is one that's commonly found in this space. But cysteine has multiple uses, in fact, just like every amino acid. But one of the uses of cysteine is to go into hair. And in fact, the disulfide bonds between the sulfhydryl groups, the ionized and cysteine, are what make hair curly. That's why we have that. Now, you have no conscious control over which road cysteine takes once it's in your body. These subconscious or non-conscious decisions are based purely on the signals that your body is getting epigenetically. So if it determines this individual piece of cysteine that I'm holding now is required in this pathway, as opposed to going into this person's hair, it will go into that pathway. And so taking an individual amino acid does nothing but make sure there is no deficiency of that individual amino acid. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will go into the pathway of your conscious choice. And so that's why I believe in a rounded whole food diet, species appropriate. And when you get all the amino acids together and you realize, or not when you realize, but when you have a lack of deficiency across the board, all the pathways are going to, all the pathway boxes are going to be ticked in as well and also a nature intended way as possible. So I don't think there's necessarily any harm in taking an individual amino acid. in appropriate doses. But I think there's more benefit from making sure you have a generally all amino acid containing diet, which of course I think is not really going to be ticked in a vegan diet unless you really go out of your way to do something extra. But I think if you're having a piece of steak, or if you're a baby having breast milk, that's automatic. And I think that's the best way to go. If you need an individual amino acid, then that is something, again, as the word suggests, individual to you as well, that you would need to speak to someone about to really try and diagnose whether that is the case or not. And I would suggest, but not dictate, that if you have a sufficient amount of high quality protein, such as say beef, lamb, etc., I doubt most people in that situation are going to have a deficiency of a particular single amino acid. That's the way I feel. But again, I think there are people out there who would disagree as well.
Yeah, that's a very fair, rational, and logical, balanced take. I think. I mean, I can't really argue with that. I think the problem you have there is that you will have communities of people that have tried something. So I could type in beef burger diet. There'll be a beef burger diet 7-day lose 20 pounds.com website. Like anything, it'll be some sort of cult, some sort of niche target audience, I guess. Now in the bodybuilding community, which it kind of links a bit to autism in a way, I'm trying to say that they'll be using injectable carnitine now as like a fat loss lipotrophic agent, sort of thing, lipolytic. So using that maybe before cardio or a few times a day. They're also doing that when they've got a substantially high protein diet. And my question is, someone that is, physically active, has a high protein diet, they're filling in all those gaps, but their opinion, their experience, their anecdote is that I've noticed better fat loss by adding this in, or whether it be for mental health, or it be for autism with touring, things like that. What do you say to the person that's had an anecdotal benefit, yet seemingly the protein intake is through the roof?
It's a very good point. And I think in that particular, let's take that as an example. Someone who is on a process of fat loss. So let's define this hypothetical person as storing a super physiological level of fat. So they do need to lose some. In that particular process, in order for the fat to go from here to urine or breath, heat, etc., i.e. completely metabolized, there are steps in between. And when there is a lot of fat being broken down, and it needs to go from intact fatty acid or triacylglyceride to waste products, the rate there now becomes a rate limiting step, which is a technical term in studying biochemistry. If that rate limiting step is all the processes in between, for example, CPT1, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1. And what happens is, in that situation, the fatty acid or triacylglyceride, the source, layman's terms, that is what's called a zero order reaction. Or this is the reaction is zero order with respect to the fatty acids. What that means is, if you were to increase the level of that, it doesn't increase the rate of output, because we have that rate limiting step or steps in between. And so in that individual situation, having more carnitine, for example, in the step of carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1, can therefore increase the rate of output, i.e. the reaction kinetics, because it is alleviating itself as the rate limiting step. So the limit on the rate limiting step is now higher, therefore there is now an increase in output. And so in that individual situation, when you study the kinetics of those biochemical reactions, that's why we have an N=1 most likely true anecdotal story, because of that individual situation where the amino acid they're supplementing has been turned into a rate limiting step based on what they are trying to do. For the average person who is not trying to do fat loss, because there is no rate limiting step, because there's not a massive amount of fat trying to be metabolized, there is no need for extra amount of that, and they probably won't notice that difference. So if you put yourself in a situation where an individual amino acid becomes relatively deficient, i.e. becomes a rate limiting step, i.e. becomes a first or second order part of the reaction, then increasing it temporarily for that purpose in that situation